Welcome to a very special edition of Narrative Live. It's 7 p.m. on the East Coast. It's very rare for me to be doing shows this late, but this kind of report that's going on about what tomorrow's big generals meeting is all about is very important. I think many of us will agree this is fundamental to the future of our republic. And I'm so excited that Professor Terrence Goggin is here. Hi, Prof. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Thank you
Good
for
to be in San
rejoining us.
Francisco.
Are you in San Francisco? I didn't know that. I got to say, your last appearance here was such a hit. People loved you. So I'm glad you got back for a second appearance here on Narrative. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I appreciate doing it. Oh,
It's great.
my views went up. My views went up, so that's
Oh, you
great.
did? That's good. Good. And
Oh,
glad people are finding your writing.
subscribers. So yeah.
I love that. I love to hear that. And Nick Paro, everybody knows as well, is a huge star here now on Substack, I can say confidently. Nick is also a veteran, and I'm glad you're here joining the conversation today.
Thanks, Zev, and it's great to be here, and it's great to be on with you, Professor Goggin. And it's nice to meet you. I know we met a little bit pre-show, but it's really nice to meet you. My family has a really rich history in service. I'm a veteran of the Army. My brothers are both veterans. My dad is a veteran. My grandparents are veterans. My cousins are veterans. My sisters-in-laws are veterans.
Go
My
Army,
wife is a
right?
veteran.
Did you have any choice?
I was the last of the boys in my family of the men to join. And I never had the intention to, but I did after college. And so I just want to say thank you for teaching, and providing learning for West Point graduates. Some of the best officers that I actually interacted with were from West Point compared to some of the others, because they actually learned some stuff. So I accredit to folks like you who taught them really well.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
It's
They're great. They're great students.
And I thank you both for your service. Let me set the scene a little bit for tomorrow. This is War Secretary, as he's now called, Pete Hegseth's meeting of the minds with the generals, meeting them eye to eye, whatever he called it in his initial description of it. There was, in the initial stages, no real agenda. It was all very short notice. Some people read it as a loyalty flex. And then on the weekend... You can hear me? Maybe Dick, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think Professor Goggin's internet is is having a hard time with all the all the hearts coming in.
Is it me?
Okay, we can hear you. So it might just be the internet connection if that's an issue. So if you say, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, let's hope that holds. If not, we'll have to just reconnect with you. But hopefully it'll hold. So we were talking about this also, being a loyalty flex, and then the president showed up on NBC yesterday, and he defined tomorrow's meeting as being a very nice and esprit de corps, a meeting with a tone would be softened. It was really a fascinating description from what we had all expected of tomorrow. Now, it's unclear whether, from some reporting, he's just, maybe not being as honest about what tomorrow's meeting is about. And from other reporting, including your own, Professor Goggin, where you report that the president has really, had it with his Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, and is really diving in there in order to save this from a catastrophe. Either way, it's an incredibly rare thing, Professor, to have 800 generals being sent from their posts around the world, being forced to just drop whatever it is they were doing, which I'm sure is very important to national security amongst many other things, and to have to fly across the world, in some cases very far across the world, in order to have this what was originally a 1-hour meeting. Now it might be a 2-hour meeting, but what is essentially a pep talk. What's your sense of why the president moved in to shift the focus from that initial Hegseth assessment to what you're now describing?
Well, let me just open with this, because I, too, have never heard of a meeting like this, with one exception. There's only one exception that I know of where you had hundreds of general officers present. And that was on June 5th, 1944, when the King of England and the High Command were giving a briefing by the generals that were commanding the invasion of exactly what was going to happen. That briefing went on for 3 or 4 hours in a major church. There was quite an audience for that. But since that historic event, I know no meeting where hundreds of generals were called together who were all commanders. I mean, maybe generals attending school or something, but not for purposes of an operational meeting. So it's a very unusual, if not a unique meeting. Secondly, to say that the military officers, and for that matter, the entire organization, were frustrated with how Hegseth called this meeting is beyond, I mean, it's way beyond frustration. Frankly, they're enraged, and they're deeply enraged because it goes against their entire ethic. You don't call these kinds of meetings to intimidate general officers who have combat experience, command combat experience. They've been in combat or related activities for 20 years. We've been at war for 20 years. These men have all been at war. And for this former major in the National Guard, whose best command was to be a civil affairs officer in Fallujah or someplace. He has no command experience. He got a combat infantryman's badge because he was in a combat zone, but he didn't leave troops in battle at all. For him to come in with a statement that he's going to give a lecture on military ethos, warrior ethos. By the way, the military never refers to themselves as warriors. They refer to themselves as military men, operatives, all sorts of different things, but they don't use that term, warriors. In fact, that relates to different kinds of activity and combat. The fact that he was doing this without any kind of formal workup, notification, coordination with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and so forth is so beyond normal that they concluded that this was an attempt to intimidate them through some sort of massive firing or reduction in grade or revamping the combat commands, all of those things. And with no prior planning or notice and with no opportunity to discuss it. So the whole situation is designed to really enrage a military man, and he succeeded in doing that. Now, what happened, I believe, is that Hegseth never told Trump he was going to do this.
Unbelievable.
The reason that he didn't do that is because Hegseth knew that the first thing the president would do is talk to General Dan Crane, who's his principal military advisor by law as the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he knew that Dan Crane would tube it with the president. So I think in a very juvenile kind of way, he thought he could get away with it and ask forgiveness. So he just went forward and did it. And all holy hell broke loose. I don't think he's ever experienced the kind of hell that he just experienced, because I can tell from the way things have developed in the last several days, there was immense pressure and what I would say is pushback to the president through Dan Crane, but he didn't have to listen to Dan Crane to understand the kind of opposition that they were getting to this meeting. He could read it in the Washington Post. So the bottom line was the president wasn't about to take on this kind of a battle. So what does he do? Well, he could have called up Pete and said, "Look, Pete, this is a bad idea. I know I have to maintain your status here as the Secretary of Defense. So we'll do a Zoom meeting. I'll be there, or you be there, and we're going to tell these folks just how wonderful they are, because there are people. We've had tremendous victories with them. We've done something with them that no other military has done in the last 20 years, getting rid of the Iran nuclear capability, blah, blah, blah. So he could have done that, and he didn't do that. No, he didn't do that at all. Instead, he did a classic Trump brief statement, NBC, that he was attending, and this had nothing to do with any kind of criticism of the military. They're wonderful people. We have had a tremendous record. This is a esprit de corps meeting. Well, and you know Trump, he doesn't have a prepared speech, so he's going to get up there and talk. And he's not going to talk for just 15 or 20 minutes. He's going to talk for an hour or more. God knows how long he'll talk. He won't even have a script probably. And he will just ramble on and tell them all the great things that they've done, all of the great accomplishments, all of his victories as well as theirs. That's his style. And what's Hegseth going to do? He's going to sit there and listen to it. And it's exactly the opposite of what he wanted to achieve. So let's talk about that for a second. Why did he do this in the first place? Because over the last 6 months, he's gotten to the point where nobody respects him. Worse, they are very suspicious of him. They can't tell him any secrets of operational activities because he has a tendency to brag about that. So he's put in the proverbial telephone booth. He's got a very nice office, and he's surrounded with staff that are his choosing, but then nobody talks to them. Unless they're asked a specific question, they give specific answers and nothing else. As a result, he can't really lead the Pentagon. There's no way a Secretary of Defense can sit in this grand office in the corner of the E-ring of the Pentagon and run, 3 million people, which is the size of the Pentagon's staff, military and civilian alike. It's impossible. So he has gotten the message that he is not in charge. And who is in charge? Well, it's pretty clear Dan Crane is really in charge. Now, theoretically, Dan Crane reports only to the president as the principal military advisor to the president. But he is outside of the chain of command by design. The Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff has no command responsibility. He is the advisor to the commander-in-chief. Now, the direct commands are, once the president decides what to do, the chain of command goes through the Secretary of Defense to the combatant commanders. The chiefs of staff of the various military units, like the Navy and the Air Force and Special Operations, the chiefs of staff support the combat operations, the combatant commanders. You need an aircraft carrier? Okay, we'll get you the aircraft carrier. How many planes do you need on the aircraft carrier? It's that kind of a relationship. So the idea that Dan Crane, this fell into his lap, and he surprised him as much as anybody else. But what's he going to do? Well, he's going to whisper in the ear of the president, look, this is really a bad idea. It's having a terrible blowback. And by the way, it could cause you a political disaster because the most respected institution in the United States is the military. Polls all show that. Do you really want to get into an accidental big beef with the military and your commanders? That's what Hegseth is leading you into, or leading the administration into. So Trump decided, I've had enough of this guy. This is the last straw. He's had 3 strikes. Strike number 1 was showing Musk top secret plans to defend Taiwan. And Trump was so caught off guard that he immediately called the Pentagon and said, Musk doesn't belong there, get him out of the building, which they did. So he was about to enter the briefing. And then that was Trump's command. He was pulled out and sent away. The second thing that happened was he was caught on Signal Gate, bragging to his family, who were also on there, basically, that he knew the exact time and place that these missiles would hit, and the locations and so forth, which all endangered endangered the crew because they could be shot down because the enemy now knows when they're coming and what they're delivering and what the speed is and all sorts of things. So the third strike is this: calling a surprise meeting of all of the combatant commanders without any kind of agenda, without any kind of previous discussion of what's going to be discussed, and pulling them out of their combat commands. Now, that's really the worst thing he did, because we are on the brink of war in Europe. We are actually having invasions of NATO with Russian air vehicles. We also have a situation in Taiwan where Russia is training Chinese airborne troops to make surprise attack by air on Taipei to decapitate the government. This is really nutty. Combat commanders have to be on alert 24 hours a day because you never know when an emergency is going to arise. He has a staff, but he's the boss. You pull him out. Who's the boss there? Well, it could be his deputy commander, but the deputy commander then would like, before anything he decides takes place, he's going to try to reach him. And if he's in Washington, it's going to take at least several minutes, if not more. And several minutes in a combat situation is a lifetime. Minutes count, seconds are long. So this whole concept of pulling all of these men away from their combat commands, particularly in the crises we have, at least in the Pacific and in Europe, was very dangerous. That's the most important thing. It was dangerous. And as a result, nobody could allow him to, or at least would be supportive of him remaining in office. So my hypothesis is, I don't know for sure, but my hypothesis is that the reason Trump didn't give him an easy out was to so embarrass him, because the embarrassment is just starting. What's going to happen when they have all the 800 generals there, his generals? He says, I want to look my generals in the eye. And he doesn't get to do that. No, it's the president of the United States who gets to look his generals in the eye, and they're, believe it or not, Trump thinks they're his generals, not Hegseth's.
So, Professor, let me push back a little bit here, if you don't mind, unless you want to finish the thought you're about to make there.
Okay, go ahead.
We have the president saying now, optically, that he's making this about esprit de corps, that he is, he's there to celebrate all the successes of the military. He's there to tell them that he loves them. But in reality, we still have a situation where his entire military strategy is pivoting, not towards these other conflicts in Europe, or not towards these other conflicts in China, but actually towards domestic deployment of troops. I mean, that seems to be underpinning a lot of what he's talking about here. Is there a sense that you could ask the generals of that question, or please pose that as a new strategy, and use that as a test of their loyalty to him? Because that's, of course, something that they would resist to do. But could it be used as a loyalty test?
Okay, and first of all, that was a good question. What was their plan? They want to bring the troops back to defend the Western Hemisphere, reduce the number of combatant commanders overseas, etc. So I looked it up. That's illegal. They can't do that because those commands were set up by law. The combatant commanders have a certain region to control, like Central Command, like the Pacific, and so forth. That's all set up by statute. You can't change it. The president can't change it. He has to go to Congress and ask it to be changed. I gave a long sort of background on the way this all evolved, but from 1775 to this day, Congress is in charge of the military. The president is not. He's the commander-in-chief in charge of operations. But he does not control the war power. He does not control the appropriations. And he does not control where the troops are located. That is a function of Congress. It's always been that way. since the Continental Congress told Washington where to go and what to do and how many troops and how much money he'd get. And it's been the same way ever since. So all of these rumors about them doing these kinds of things are just their amateurish way. The Hegseth and Vance and Miller are just amateurs playing around with very serious stuff. They're talking about doing things that is not, they don't have the power to do. And neither does the president, even if they can convince the president to do so. Now, what happens is Trump doesn't really pay attention to the details. So his guys go off and they do these nutty things, and then he's surprised by it. And so who does he turn to? Well, in a lot of his other different operations, he may be turning to the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Commerce, whatever. But in military affairs, he only turns to one person, and that's the Chief of Staff, the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Crane, who he picked personally, and he really likes, and who delivered for him by knocking out Fordo with no casualties. So as far as Trump is concerned, the man walked. So the point is that they are way over their skis. You can't retreat to the Western Hemisphere and defend the Western Hemisphere and occupy Portland, because that's just not the law. And if he started to do things like that, I also thought this through. There's the case of Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr was the vice president of the United States under Jefferson. But when he left the vice presidency, he decided to form a new country. And he discussed with the governors of the territories of the Western states. They weren't states, but they were territories then. In the Mississippi Valley, he started colluding with them to form a separate nation. And the collusion to move out from control territory of the federal government was considered by Thomas Jefferson treason. And so he had him charged with treason, and the Chief Justice tried the case, John Marshall, and he gave him he acquitted him, but the only reason he acquitted him was that he had not performed an overt act. He had not actually done something to advance taking these territories. Had he done so, it would have been treasonous. Well, get back to the idea of moving troops from NATO back to this country, moving troops from the Pacific back to this country. You're creating a different construct from the Constitution of the United States. You're almost seceding from the Constitution, more like the Southern states did. You're not president of the United States anymore. You're president of some imaginary country because that country doesn't exist yet. And conceptually, Trump and his cohorts are in very dangerous territory. They don't realize it, but they are. There's a number of articles that have recently written in academia about this problem, and that this is treasonous talk. Now, it hasn't gone that far yet, but it's getting close. When they start trying to do things that are way over the top with regard to congressional powers, they're creating a new nation practically, and that's treason.
Certainly seem to be ignoring the Constitution wherever they can. Nick, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah,
yes.
The Constitution is a piece of paper. It's enforced by the people that are involved with the powers of the Constitution, and that includes the Congress of the United States.
And the military.
With the Congress and the military, exactly. And the military is loyalty. Its loyalty has traditionally been to Congress.
Yeah,
and so let's jumping in with the idea of like funding and pay and how the military is going to get any appropriations for the actions that are going on. Congress is set to shut down tomorrow, basically, because they don't want to release the Epstein files. Mike Johnson is going to run away and shut Congress down. One, not to release the Epstein files, but also not to fund the government. There is concern that when the government funding gets paused and Congress goes home. Well, Congress isn't actually going home because Congress is still having to work to find a resolution to fund the government, supposedly. What happens then when there is really no congressional structure anymore to push back against Trump and say they do something, not so much invade Portland in the end, but start a war in Venezuela? And that is less treason. That doesn't have the treason aspect to it and is almost unjustifiable because we're wagging the dog on this one. But what are your thoughts around that, Professor, on will this be will they use the shutdown no matter what happens? Will they use a shutdown to try and consolidate as much as they can by starting a conflict external to the US?
Well, see, the powers of Congress don't disappear if they're not in session. The powers of Congress are, as long as the Constitution exists, are eternal. They're eternal. They follow the Constitution no matter what is going on. And because the appropriation process and the budget process and the funding process has been suspended, it has no effect on congressional powers. So Congress, if they wanted to, could convene and pass resolutions and various things to deny the president the ability to invade Venezuela, for example. Now, whether this Congress would do that is another question.
Yeah.
And if this Congress decided that they wanted to invade, and they would authorize the president to invade Venezuela, they have the majority votes in both houses of Congress to do so. That's not unconstitutional. That's perfectly legal. So, yeah, I think Venezuela, as you say, is a wag the dog kind of situation. It has nothing to do with anything that's very important. What is important is what's going on in Europe right now, and to the extent to which the military is involved in helping Ukraine target long-range targets and supplying them with long-range missiles to isolate Russia's front line in Ukraine by knocking off all their supply capability to those places. And for the first time since the war began, Ukraine is getting those long-range missiles, but they need the targeting information, and the United States is the only entity that can give them the targeting information. So that's a big concern. If the government shuts down, doesn't mean that the military stops operating either. The military continues to operate whether the appropriations are going forward or the funding is going forward anyway. And on an emergency basis, they will be paid. The penitent budget in shutdowns is not affected by very much. Maybe the reserves are, but not the active duty members.
But just to add to what Nick was saying there, I think in this shutdown, any travel that this seems like out of the combat necessity or emergency travel, if I understand the situation correctly, these generals that will be here starting tomorrow might get stranded because they will need Hexet's authorization to fly back home and to incur the costs of flying back home.
No, he doesn't. They don't need Hexet's permission to fly back home.
Management
and budget. The Office of Management and Budget in the White House would be asked to authorize the funding to send all of the commanders back to their commands. You're telling me that they're going to refuse, that the White House would refuse to send the commanders back to their commands?
I mean, that's a scenario that's being painted by some people, that potentially you're going to have, them doing some sort of loyalty test.
Yeah, that's Russell Vought taking control of the budget, and Stephen Miller, who wants to instigate a war. And I understand the generals themselves may not go with it in the military. And this is less about will the military go with it. It's more, will the military be stranded by the decisions of the White House to keep them in the US? So let's say, even taking it one step further, Russia attacks Europe tomorrow and Taiwan gets attacked by China. Would our president allow and Secretary of Defense, or even the Joint Chief of Staff, would they allow our generals to go back, or would they attempt to pull all of our troops, illegal or not, to attempt to pull all of our troops as close to home as possible and not support NATO in any way? Because that's the fear is less we pull out of NATO and we just choose not to do anything.
That's I researched this. Okay, you can't pull out of NATO without congressional consent. It's a treaty. That's the law of the land. You can't pull out of various areas where there is congressional authorization, if not an order, to defend those areas. Those are all illegal, unconstitutional orders.
Correct.
And frankly, if somebody wanted to be tough about it, they could be arrested. They could be arrested for a treasonous act because they're thwarting the will of Congress in a wartime situation, which is almost the definition of treason. You can't give aid and comfort to your enemies, our enemies. Anybody who does give aid and comfort, by definition, commits treason. So
well, our
the
president
scenario
does.
you paint is that our president does what?
Gives aid and comfort to our enemies. He allowed Vladimir Putin on U.S. soil when Vladimir Putin has a international arrest warrant, and they have been our fiercest opponent since World War II ended, basically. And we started going against Russia and Russia against us in the USSR. I don't know if we lost Professor there for a second.
Are you there, Professor? Oh, we might have lost him. Let's just see if it resolves. Oh, you could hopefully he'll rejoin us. Nick, you're saying the truth there. Of course, this is exactly what the president has been doing, and I know the professor is probably a little is not as far deep into the rabbit hole as you and I might be, but it certainly seems to me that when you look at the new surveillance laws that were passed last week, or directive that was passed last week, in addition to the fact that they've been going after Jim Comey and all the FBI directors, you've got, it's not an impossibility from my mind that we would see that sort of third prong of that of dictatorial hold would be getting the military onto American soil in large scale. I just think that that's policy now for them. And there will be lots of generals that are opposed to that idea tomorrow, I'm sure. Now, how will they act? I don't know, and that's what I was trying. I was hoping to ask the professor if he joins us again. But I think that's the test tomorrow. I think that the generals are going in knowing that the policy is shifting, knowing that they might be asked to change or break the laws, at least avoid following the laws. I don't think they could do that, but they might be asked that question. And that's the loyalty test. That's do you follow me or do you follow the U.S. Constitution that Donald Trump is putting before them?
Professor Goggin's back in the chat too as well.
Professor, are you in the chat or are you going to join us through the live? Maybe I have to re-invite you. Let me see.
I think you have to re-invite him.
That makes sense.
No, I think, and my take on it is yes, it's more on the catastrophizing side, but we live in the time of the Occam's razor of Trump's razor, where if they can do the worst and dumbest thing possible, they're going to. And so I think they're going to try, even because his numbers are tanking. Trump is old, and there's only so much time a dying dictator has to consolidate the power behind him. And the real question, I guess another question would be, other than we know that financing and the budget aspect of it is not really in the executive branch's control. Neither is the fact that the military truly falls under Congress compared to the executive. We know this, but so many people in the U.S. don't. And so much of the U.S. military has been propagandized by Fox News and stations like that. With that in mind, and with the current environment of what's going on compared to historical events, how would you see this in terms of the Night of the Long Knives and when they prepared for that coming in? Because a lot of us on the outside can say, this looks like that will be the case, is there will be a loyalty test of some sort no matter what, because Trump is going to always demand loyalty. But do you think it's going to be more than just a simple Trump trying to continue to demand additional loyalty? And do you think if funding is paused, they really care and that they'll just do what they want anyways.
Well, when you say they will do what they want anyways, what are you talking about? Doing what?
Well, they have positioned themselves using language such as Antifa are domestic terrorists. They constantly put that out there to make it truth because Trump is all about the big lie of you have to repeat it, and enough times to repeat it, it becomes the zeitgeist and it becomes plausible truth. Is if enough people hear through Fox News, through propaganda networks that are considered news networks nowadays, if the illegal, in our view of an illegal order is given, would not the generals so much, but would, if one general authorizes it and their troops start opening fire, do you think that would be a case that generals would actually stand up and say, no, we will not do this?
Well, there's so many different variables when you're talking about troops firing on civilians. Uh, they have the right, the troops do. There's usually what's called terms of engagement in order discussing when you can and cannot fire your weapon. And usually in riot situations, um, there must be an immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm on the troops. They're not authorized to fire otherwise. Now, what actually happens on the ground, though, is that particularly young National Guardsmen can panic, and they think they're at risk when they're really not, and they start firing. Now, that happened during the Vietnam War at Kent State, where the National Guards fired on college students that were protesting, and I believe killed one or two of them. There's that very famous picture of a of a wounded or dead student with the girl over him screaming. Sure, bad things can happen. Um, they happen because people make mistakes, like the National Guardsmen did. But whether or not it's authorized and legal is a completely different question. And the activities at Kent State were illegal because they were using excess force. But who determines that? Well, the military does have a court-martial system, so they take care of their own. If you authorize your troops to fire on innocent civilians, you take very severe consequences. You could end up in prison for a very long time. The My Lai massacre is an interesting example. In 1968, or was it 67? Um, a, a, a company from the Marical division was in a village, and the commander of that company was a relatively raw captain, and I think he was actually a first lieutenant. And he his name was Callie, and he determined that this whole village, full of women and children and old men, because uh, the age for their warriors, so to speak, they were all gone. So I just said people that were younger or older. And he went in and he decided that the whole village was an imminent threat to his platoon or his company. And he ordered every man, woman, and child in the village to be killed. And his troops obeyed that order. And they went in and they killed, I think, about 346 civilians. What was the consequences of that? Well, for one thing, Callie was court-martialed, convicted, and it was sentenced for, I believe it was 10 years or so. Later, it was commuted to 6, I believe. But up the chain of command, the interesting thing happened. The commanding general of the Marical division was a general by the name of Coster. And General Coster was the superintendent at West Point when the scandal broke, when it was actually revealed in public. Hadn't been revealed, it was kept secret. It was completely covered up. But when that broke, I was at West Point at the time, and General Coster was the superintendent. Well, this was so upsetting to the Corps of Cadets that they were that their superintendent was being accused of such a horrendous act. He allowed it. He didn't allow it to happen, but he covered it up, and he prevented anybody from knowing anything about it. That was his problem, and they felt that that was a very disreputable act, which of course violates their honor code. And Koster was so moved and so embarrassed that he actually called the Corps of Cadets together and he gave them an address. And it was a very defensive address. I attended that speech. It was very emotional. He was brought to tears. And in effect, he said, look, my career is ruined. And I want to tell you, don't ever do anything like this in the future. Don't cover anything up. And then he left. And he was reduced in grade from a major general to a brigadier, which is a huge problem for somebody because their retirement benefits would probably be cut in half. And of course, his reputation was destroyed, and he was a very prominent officer at the time. So, getting back to the situation you suggest, all of these individuals that are in the military have long-term careers looking forward to. The lieutenant that is flying the plane, that is shooting the civilians in a narco boat, so to speak. Under this administration, he's been authorized to do that. But it's an illegal order. The next administration may say, look, you can't say I'm ordered to do it and that's a defense. No. What did they tell you were the circumstances that justified using lethal force? Did you ask them that? And now that pilot, he may be 25 years old, is put right in the bullseye. And some of them could go to jail or at least have their career ruined. And, having your career ruined at the age of 25 is terrible. So they have to think about that. And they will, believe me, that they're smarter than doing that. And there is a procedure for them to say, sir, I think that's an illegal order. Can you tell me why it's justified? And by the way, could you send me that in writing? Text it to me or whatever you want to do, but send me that in writing. And the commander or the president or whoever is giving you his orders would say, well, you're fired. Yes, sir, I'm fired. Yeah, get another pilot to do it. Well, the other pilots, seeing that coming down, are starting to say, well, and not me. And you can have a very bad situation. It can be a semi-mutiny where they're refusing to take orders.
But isn't that what we might have tomorrow? I mean, you've got I think this pivot to domestic enforcement, although you seem to say it's not going to happen, it is already happening. It is their intended policies
wait a minute here. When you say domestic enforcement, what are you talking about? Tell me exactly what acts of the Army to date that you object to.
Well, so far they haven't done anything. They haven't done anything yet.
Are we including just the Army or in this, or is it all the armed services to include Marines who have been stationed in California?
I think the Marines have been included, but
the only troops involved in domestic enforcement are National Guard troops today. Right. No regular army.
And that's an important distinction. It's really important to say that there are no real military forces right now stationed inside the United States. Federal forces. But this is clearly the intention of this administration, is to move towards that. And I think tomorrow we're going to see that as a policy statement by the president. And I think the generals are going to be asked to consider it.
Performative art. Yeah, well, it's performative. It's performative. It doesn't have any impact. He sent troops into D.C., which he has a perfect right to do because he's the president and he controls the National Guard. And D.C. is not a state. They have far less sovereignty. In any event, they ended up cleaning up the mall, protecting federal buildings, sweeping the streets, picking up trash. So there wasn't. When you say an occupation force, it's a performative statement. It isn't a reality, and all of this is meant to get headlines. And it's very hard for a lawyer or a historian or anybody else to get the handle around such amorphous actions. Well, what is this? If they're in there arresting people like ICE is doing, that's one thing. But the military isn't doing that. That's a civil police force that's doing that. If he had army people in there picking up migrants, that would be a huge problem for the military, because that's completely beyond their authorization to do. It's a posse comitatus thing.
He's been. Sorry, finish that thought. I was going to say that he's been playing with this idea of martial law since the end of his previous term as president. He's been thinking about the Insurrection Act in various forms for a long time. All of that sort of implies, well, I'm going to call in the military at the end of the day. And in one instance, he said that he would rerun the elections under military authority. So this is not a president that's not at least fantasized about the idea of bringing in the military into domestic enforcement.
I completely agree with you, but that's his performance. If he were to actually try to go into county recorders' offices and take charge of the election with military force, that would be a treasonous act, because it's unconstitutional. It's interfering with the election process. It's interfering with democracy, the fundamentals of democracy. And that is what is described by treason, as was the insurrection during the count of the presidential election in 2021. That was not only an insurrection, but it was treason. They didn't choose to charge treason. They charged insurrection. But Trump could have been indicted by Merrick Garland, the Attorney General under the Biden administration. I believe he could have been indicted for treason for his action there. Now, in fact, Professor Tribe at Harvard strongly advised that and wrote a serious piece in a law review article about why Merrick Garland blew it by not going forward with treason with Trump. Because many of the things that he did were technical problems. But the real thing he did was try to overthrow the government by preventing the president-elect to be sworn or to be elected and then sworn in. So that's a very serious crime. And he wasn't charged with it. Why wasn't he charged with it? Well, because he was popular. He was popular with half the country. So Biden didn't want to upset half the country. And that's a good reason not to do it. But legally, it's a very dangerous thing for him to do. So one of the things I pointed out, I think the last time I was on here, is I'd be much more concerned about Trump and what he would do under circumstances if he was wildly popular. Popularity is very, very strong in influencing the military. If the president and the leader is very popular, they're very hesitant to do anything other than to support him. The German army did the same thing with Hitler. They wanted to overthrow him, but he was too popular. They didn't feel they could do it. But he was popular, wildly popular. Trump is not. He's down at maybe somewhere in the 35% approval rating right now. So the vast majority of the country does not approve of what he's doing. That puts the army in a very powerful position to make a decision on its own, whether to either accept the order and follow through with it or refuse to do it. And then if he tries to do something nefarious with regard to the army itself or the military itself, they will defend themselves.
Would firing all the generals that are opposing a policy like that, would that be treasonous, or would that be within the range of his abilities?
Firing the entire general officer corps would be treason, in my opinion, because it's a direct attack on the state. The state does not exist without a military to defend it. The military defends the Constitution of the United States. That's their sworn duty. If you're going to try to eliminate their ability to defend the Constitution by firing or decapitating the army, that's a treasonous act.
And what if you'd wanted to just eliminate some of them, like a few that were not seeming to be on board with your policy? Would that be treasonous, or would that be okay?
Well, the question is, does that prevent the military from defending the republic? If it does not interfere with the ability of the military to defend the republic, then it's within his purview as the commander-in-chief to decide this person is, I trust in this person, because that's actually the test for an officer. Does the commander have confidence in him? I don't have confidence in him anymore, and I'm relieving him of command. All of that is perfectly legal. But a mass firing is not that. So
what if the generals said that they did refuse to follow his new policy en masse? All 800 of them said, no, we're not going to do this. What happens then to the president?
Well, what's the president going to do about it? He can't arrest them. Who's going to arrest all those generals? Going to call in the army to arrest their own generals, or the Marine Corps? ICE doesn't have the ability to arrest generals.
Oh.
I mean, and that is exactly what Dan Crane, I'm sure, told the president. He said, this can lead to a disaster for you politically, because many of the possibilities that you just outlined and discussed could have happened with Hegseth in particular. Hegseth could have attempted to fire half of the general officers, at which point many of them may have asserted the fact that that was a treasonous act. And we're not going to obey it. We're not going to leave our jobs because you've committed treason. You're trying to prevent us from defending the republic, which is our life work. Now, this has never happened before, exactly like this, but it happened in a very similar situation. In 1861, when Lincoln was elected but not yet sworn in, the president of the United States at the time, James Buchanan, favored the Confederacy, and his Secretary of War was Jefferson Davis, who later became the president of the Confederacy. And Buchanan and the Secretary of War decided that they wanted to move troops around and ammunition around and cannons around so that the southern states would be in a position to defend themselves and perhaps even defeat the Union. General Winfield C. Scott, the commanding general of the United States Army, told Buchanan that that was an illegal act and he would not execute those orders. He also communicated directly to the president-elect Lincoln to tell him that he was completely loyal and the Army would be loyal to the new president, because half the officer corps or more were leaving for the South at the time, but the institution of the Army remained under Winfield Scott. And he organized the defense of Washington because, as he wrote an interesting letter once to I actually read some of his memoirs. He wrote a letter during this time, and he said, I think it was to one of the governors of the states. He said, the capital is now in a foreign country. Your capital is in a foreign country, and we've got to defend it. And he put in all the cannons and the trenches and all these things to keep Washington safe. And then, of course, Lincoln came in a very hazardous journey through Maryland. Since the slave states surrounded Washington, D.C., Maryland in the north and to the west, and Virginia into the south and to the east. And they were completely surrounded. So there was no way for Lincoln to get there easily. They would have to go through Baltimore. And a mob, had organized, a Confederate mob, for lack of a better term, had organized and had been plotting to intercept Lincoln's train as it was coming through Baltimore, overturn his car and burn it and kill him. Well, Lincoln's security chief was a guy by the name of Pinkerton, who became very famous later. And he organized a bunch of his detectives to go in and pretend that they were rebels as well. In fact, he even disguised himself, and he attended these meetings and found out exactly what their plans were, which he felt were quite serious. And so he communicated with Lincoln and with Winfield Scott, and they came up with a plan. And it's a long story, but I'll make it very brief. The president's train ended in, or they transferred him to a different secret train in Pennsylvania, and they took a secret train into Baltimore that landed at 3 a.m. in the morning. And then they had to get him across to the station. Back then, the stations didn't have the trains going south. They just had the trains for going north. You had to go to a separate station to get the trains going south. And normally, you'd ride in a carriage. Instead, they hooked up horses to his sleeper car, and at 3 a.m. in the morning, brought him through to the other station in Baltimore. And there he was met by a detachment of cavalry who then protected him along with the detectives on his way to Washington, D.C. And when he landed in Washington, D.C., the town was completely occupied by the Union Army. And he intentionally brought in very, very tall officers and enlisted men to surround the president so that he was protected. It's a really good story, and actually,
It's a good story. It's be a
next
movie.
Now, all of this was unauthorized by Buchanan. The incumbent president did not authorize this. In fact, opposed all this. He didn't want Lincoln being inaugurated in Washington. He wanted to be inaugurated in New York, which of course was not the nation's capital, and Lincoln refused. So it's not unusual for, I mean, I wouldn't say it is unusual, but it is not unique in history that we have had a situation where a president is going against the Constitution and his administration is going against the Constitution, trying to prevent the new president, from becoming inaugurated and in charge. So Trump is in a very bad situation legally if he attempts to do this.
Right. Well, that's an interesting place to leave it, because we're just running out of time here. But Nick, I wanted to give you. Oh, maybe the professor's there. He's still there. Nick, do you want to add some thoughts here about you as a veteran, that enormous line of veterans that you have in your family, and just how does it feel when you have these kinds of conversations being thought about? Where the president could be potentially doing something treasonous.
It it really makes me lean back on the oath that I took for enlistment, which is really near and dear to my heart because I have a legacy of service in my family, and it's to support and defend the Constitution before the president, before your commanding officers, before anything else. It's always support and defend the Constitution. And it's really nerve-wracking at the same time, knowing that we're at the point, or we're approaching points in our current iteration of this democracy where we are relitigating what is treason and not treasonous, and who is willing to follow the oaths that they took, and who is willing to just go along with orders because they've either been propagandized into it, radicalized into it, whatever, what have you. It's the easiest choice that they can do. And a lot of soldiers will follow the lead of their sergeant or their NCO, who may say, yeah, I think this is legal enough. I don't know if we should go against it. A lot of soldiers or service members may go with it, but there's also so many that won't. And I think we need to leave ourselves with that knowledge too, is like Professor Goggin has been saying, the military is the proudest institution in this country. It is older than the country, and it is America. It is the lifeblood of America. It's a segment of the American society. It is the most diverse. It is the most inclusive. It is the most willing to grow and learn, but it's always the most dedicated to the Constitution and protecting it. And as much as I fear for some of the things that may come out of tomorrow, or catastrophize about things coming out of tomorrow, is we do need to remember that service members take that oath and we swear it and we reaffirm it every time you re-enlist, every time you redo your contract for as an officer and continue your service, you reaffirm the oath to the Constitution. And I have to believe that that our service members know that oath and the importance of it. And I think they will.
Professor, it is really all about that oath, isn't it?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
It is about the oath, ultimately. These that will determine their decisions in the next day.
Yeah, it is, but there are two different oaths.
Mm.
There's the oath that the enlisted men take, and there's an oath that the officers take. And the enlisted men's oath, it goes to obeying the orders of their appointed officers, and then to the president, and then to the Constitution. So the first thing that they're promising in their oath is to obey their officers. Now,
No, the first thing we promise in the oath of enlistment is to the Constitution.
Well, I recently read, I think it was not the oath itself, but I read a law review article about it, and I don't know which one's mentioned first. Maybe the Constitution is mentioned.
The Constitution's mentioned first.
But the point is that the point I'm trying to make is that the officer's oath is very different. The enlisted oath requires the enlisted man to obey their officers. The officer's oath does not say that at all. The officers are not promising to obey their superior officers, nor the President of the United States. They promise to follow the Constitution, to preserve and protect the Constitution. That's it. And that oath has changed over time. At one time, it was a more amorphous oath, and then during the Civil War, it became tightened. It was called the ironclad oath, where the officers had to swear that they'd never taken up arms against the country. And then later on, that was taken out, and it's just today, it's to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, which is very clear and simple. And the point is that they don't owe the president the same duty they owe the Constitution. And the other item that needs to be sort of worked into this discussion is that many of the insurrectionists of January 6th, there were 81 Army veterans, or not Army veterans, but military veterans, that participated in the insurrection, violated their oath by participating in it, because some of them were in reserve. And their defense was that they had promised to defend America, and that they were defending America by doing what they did in trying to prevent a phony election or fraudulent election from taking place. And the lawyers said, America doesn't really exist except as a geographical term. America is a geographical term. The Constitution of the United States is a piece of paper. It's a solemn law of the land. And you swore to protect that law, to preserve and protect that law and everything that is contained within that piece of paper. You're not preserving America, because America doesn't exist as a legal entity. It only exists in the Constitution as the United States of America. And so many of them had some choices to make, because they could have been convicted of very serious charges because they violated their oath. But they negotiated them out, and as long as they agreed to spend some time in prison, they were given short terms, and that none of them came to trial on that issue of violating their oath. But if they had, it would have been an interesting trial if they were going to assert that, it didn't count because I'm just defending America. These nuances are not normally litigated you're absolutely right. This is a very unusual situation. It's very uncomfortable to have to think of these things being litigated, but that's the age we're in.
That's where we are.
And
Just to
we've been here.
go ahead.
We've been here before, 1861.
Thank God for your knowledge, Professor. I'm so thankful for your deep insight and your historical knowledge. Then thanks for sharing all those great stories that really reflect on this really sobering moment that we're in right now. I mean, there's no doubt that in the next 24 hours we will find out the limits of the presidential power in terms of demanding loyalty of his military. We'll see if he does anything like that, and we'll see if the military brass react in a way that is in line with their oaths, or whether some of them choose to break away from that, which is unlikely. But it's the test that he's setting up. The defense secretary, as you point out, well, that could be a whole other story. It looks like he might be on very thin ice after this. This is his third big strike, as you called it in your piece, and it looks like he's on very thin ice there. Maybe he will actually be tripped up by this own loyalty test and this own warrior ethos that he's trying to instill in his men there. He's going to find out the hard way that maybe he doesn't have it at all himself. I'd like to thank you both so much for your insights tonight. Nick, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you and promote anything you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Zev, thank you for having me. And Professor Goggin, it was incredible to meet you tonight. Really appreciate your insights. You can all find me at Sick of This Shit with Nick here on Substack, which is my main publication. And it's political commentary, social commentary, live discussions, as well as you can find me on my second network, which is Banner and Backbone, which is our civic-based content. I'm co-founders with Lawrence Winterman and Frederick Pogue, and we're reigniting civics in the U.S. through simple actions and ways you can become part of the discussion. And one of those is we do an anti-fascist book club every Friday, based on the Veterans Fighting Fascism model from Christopher Goldsmith. So please all join me over at Sick of This Shit with Nick and at Banner and Backbone.
Thanks so much, Nick. And Professor, you're at the West Point History Professor is the name of your Substack, but everyone can find you if they just search your name, Terrence Goggin, at the on Substack. But tell us anything you'd like to promote about what's going on your incredible site.
Well, we're in the midst of doing a series of seminars on the insurrectionist or possible authoritarian moves of this administration and the history behind similar moves in the past. And I suspended for a brief period of time the final two seminars to put the special report out on this meeting. And I'm going to return to those seminars. We're going to discuss in the third seminar more of what happened in 1861 and the beginning of the Civil War and the clash between the outgoing Buchanan administration and the incoming Lincoln administration, and the Army was critical in pledging its loyalty to Lincoln. And then the following one, I haven't completed the ideas yet, but it will be about the modern situation. It will involve the suppression of the press, or the attempts to do so, and the attempts to influence and intimidate the military. These are pages taken right out of Hitler's playbook, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which, by the way, I have that book right next to me here because I'm referring to it all the time, because it's you start looking at what they're doing, and it seems like they've read this book about what Hitler did and following the cookbook. So I think we're on a roll here with those seminars. There's been a lot of interesting discussions. I entertain a lot of comments, and I try to respond to the comments, the ones that are at least asking serious questions. I write serious responses. I view it as a seminar, and more, I like to be able to respond to students and their arguments. And sometimes they're teaching me things too. Like I've learned things tonight that I didn't know before. And I just want to say one other thing. I love your idea of civics and teaching civics and encouraging that. It's such a tragedy that basic civics course, which at least I took, my generation took, where they drilled into us in grammar school basic government structure, that has somehow gone by the wayside, and people don't understand widely about the three branches of government and how they work. And it's something we were taught in grammar school. So more power to you.
And that, Nick, where's that? Is that on the Substack? Did you do that course?
Yeah. No, it's called Banner and Backbone.
Okay, so that's Banner and Backbone. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So please feel free to follow us there too. It's just bannerandbackbone.com.
And everyone should check out the press's latest post about what's going on tomorrow, the general's meeting, and also his seminars, which are really terrific. And, become a paid subscriber to both of these gentlemen. They really deserve it because they're incredible hard work in educating us all about all things military. I want to thank you both for your service and your time tonight. And we look forward to doing this again, maybe under slightly happier circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Zev. Thank you.
Thanks,
I enjoyed
gentlemen.
it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thanks to you at home for watching. I'll be back tomorrow at 2:00 with the Trump Tyranny Tracker with Olga Lautman. See you then. Bye-bye.